All right, in this lesson, we'll take a look at some research by the Dudai Lab on memory and social conformity. They're interested in trying to track down what happens in the brain when our memory can be altered by social feedback. The design of the experiment looks like this. Here we have the procedure indicated here, and here are some of the conditions of the experiment. There are four main phases of the experiment. 1, 2, 3, 4. On day 0, all subjects watch a movie. The movie is of some kind of crime scene type of thing where police are going to arrest somebody. In fact, what really happens is the police will be arresting a child in this movie. Now, all subjects watch this movie. On day 3, they take a paper pencil test. They're asked some questions about what happened in the movie 3 days earlier, like what did the policeman do? Correct answer is the policeman arrested a child. Then on day 7, they come into the lab and get into the FMRI scanner. Now here, their brain activity will be measured while they're, again, answering questions about the movie they saw a week earlier. However, they're going to be subject to a social manipulation. So here's what they see in the scanner. First, they're going to see a screen, and the question's going to come up, what did the policeman do? Already know from the day 3 testing what each subject thinks happened 3 days after seeing the movie, right? So we've got that as a baseline, a measure of their memory. So in the scanner, though, before answering that question again, they're going to be shown a screen. It's partially occluded here, but we can take a look at it over here. Here's the manipulation condition. This is the social manipulation condition. They're going to be given a screen that shows the answers of 4 other individuals in the experiment. And notice all 4 are giving the incorrect response of a man. So here we have, in a sense, some social pressure. The subject has already indicated their memory for what happened, and now they're going to be confronted with 4 other individuals recalling something different about the original movie. And it sets up a situation where maybe some of the subjects will follow the crowd, they will conform to what the others are saying, or some may resist. And Dudai and his team wanted to find out the brain activity correlates of that type of behavior. So they're going to see a screen, they're going to get the social feedback, and then after getting the social feedback, they're going to be asked again, so what did the policeman do? So while they're responding, the fMRI machine is recording their brain activity. And they'll also be asked to give confidence ratings. How confident are they in their response? Now, a week later on day 14, they come back into the lab, and they are told that this information was bogus, right? That it is not good information. These answers were kind of done randomly. So they're told, in a sense, they're given information that would lead most to disregard that information on the previous testing day. But they're in the scanner on day 14, and they're going to be asked again, what did the policeman do? Now, you might imagine some individuals might revert back to what they said on day 3. Other individuals maybe incorporated the social feedback here into their own memory. Maybe they were influenced by this, and so they will have a persistent error on that final testing day. So they wanted to examine whether different brain activity would correlate to those conditions. The people who maintain the error, as though the social feedback created a false memory, and the people maybe who initially went with the crowd, but then once they learned that that information was bogus, they reverted back to their original memory 3 days after the movie. So they wanted to see what brain activity would correlate with those different kinds of responses. Okay, here's a cartoon version of those 2 possible outcomes in the experiment. So here we have the 4 pictures would indicate the 4 stages of the experiment. They watch the movie, they take a paper pencil test to get a baseline measure of their memory for the film. They are manipulated in the 3rd stage in the scanner. They're given some social feedback, incorrect information. Then they're told that that was bogus information, and then assessed again finally as to what is their memory for the original film. Now there are 2 possible outcomes that they were interested in, right? So let's take the bottom one first. Let's suppose the person watches the movie, the subject gets the correct answer. 3 days later, the policeman arrested a child, but then they get the social feedback. 4 other individuals saying a different answer, that the police arrested a man. Now some individuals might go ahead and go with the crowd. right? But if they go ahead with the crowd at this moment, but then later, upon learning that that was bogus information, they flip back to the child, we're going to call this then an example of public conformity. So they were conforming their answer with the social feedback at this time, but they never really internalized it. They didn't really believe it. They just went with the crowd. So it's a response that is conforming to the crowd, but their actual belief about what happened never changed. We're going to call that public conformity, right? So this social feedback did not change the inner sort of memory for the experience, for the movie. They always thought it was the child, but they'll go ahead and say man here in this under this social pressure. But then later, when told that this was kind of random feedback, they will say, oh yes, I knew it all along. It's the child that was arrested. So we're going to call that, they call that a transient, a socially induced transient memory, and we might think of it as maybe just a transient response conforming to social pressure here. But it's transient because they're going to switch back to what they originally thought about the movie. That would be in contrast to up here. Here again, the subject says the child was arrested. That's correct. They get in the scanner. They're faced with contrary information from 4 other individuals. It's possible that some individuals here would be influenced by this. Perhaps because 4 others are saying a different answer, they might become less confident in their original answer, and maybe they're going to update their memory of the movie. Even when told that this was random kind of feedback, some individuals may retain that error. And so when tested on the final day here, they're going to say that the man was arrested by the police, when initially they said the child. If this is what happens, the researchers here call this a socially induced persistent error, right, in the memory. So it's a persistent, the social feedback altered the memory in a lasting way. We'll call that private conformity, right, because the inner memory for the experience has been changed by the social feedback. Okay, so now let me show you another sort of control condition that they did. They did the same procedure with other sets of subjects, except the feedback they were getting in the scanner in that second or that third stage of the procedure was not from 4 other individuals in the experiment. It was from a computer. They were told that some kind of computer algorithm generated these answers, and all 4 sort of computers are suggesting that the man was arrested. And again, those are false. That's false information. So again, we can imagine, though, 2 types of responses. Some will say, okay, the man was arrested, so they will change their response. But then upon learning that this was random feedback, they will revert back to their original memory. So that would be a non-social transient memory response, right? So it's non-social because it's a computer, and it's transient because they only momentarily here in this third phase here change their answer. They revert back to their answer on the final testing. And again, up here we can imagine a non-social persistent memory where they actually incorporate what the computers are saying into their memory. So they wanted to have a situation to compare, a social feedback from other people to non-social feedback, computer. And in fact, there was, recall, another control where they got no social feedback as well. And they also had to add portions of the experiment where the feedback was correct feedback, so as not to raise suspicion that every time they saw the social feedback it would be false information. So that was a credibility condition. So it was a complicated design. Here are some of the basic numbers, then we'll get to the brain data. In the social feedback condition, 68% of the subject trials there on the critical manipulation trials gave the incorrect response of arresting a man, right? So at 68% of the time, subjects followed what the crowd was saying. In contrast, when the computer was giving the feedback, only 45%. So we have less conformity when the computer was giving the feedback. And when there was no feedback, only 15% gave the incorrect response. So that number there indicates that they were remembering the movie a week later pretty well. So it's not like a lot of people were flipping their response from child to man. No, only 15%. But when you're getting social feedback, others are saying that the man was arrested. That was influencing a significant percentage of the subjects. Of those 68%, 41% went on to maintain that incorrect answer, right? And that means 59% reverted. So this would be private conformity. They persisted with this error due to the social feedback. That's the private conformity, and this would be public conformity, right? So they went along with it initially, went along with the feedback, but then once they learned it was random feedback, they switched back to their other answer, to the correct answer. So they reverted. Okay, so let's take a look at the FMRI data. They analyzed this in a variety of ways, but for one of the analyses, they did the following. They took the brain scans of all the folks who had a socially persistent error, so socially persistent errors, and then subtracted the scans from those who showed socially transient errors. And to give an example of what that would mean, it would be back to our cartoon here. So these folks here are changing their answer, right? So they responded child first, then the social feedback, they're saying man, so they're saying the false answer here, and they maintain that error, right? So that would be socially persistent error. And then the brain scans of those individuals minus the brain scans of those individuals that initially went with the crowd but then abandoned that. They did not retain the error. They reverted back to their initial answers. So this would be the transient crowd. So when you do that analysis, subtract the transient brain scans from the persistent error brain scans, you get those brain areas that are correlated to the socially induced memory change. And it was coactivity of the amygdala and the hippocampus was correlated. So you get increased amygdala and hippocampal activity in the condition where people are internalizing that social feedback and then incorporating that into their memory. By contrast, if you just take all of the people who showed persistent errors, whether it's through social feedback or the computer feedback, and subtract all those individuals who showed a transient error, right? So that they initially they say they follow the crowd here, but then they revert back to their original answer. If you do that subtraction, you get activity, heightened activity in the hippocampus only. So one way to interpret this is that when we are faced with social feedback, with social information, that can trigger amygdala activity. And the amygdala activity in conjunction with hippocampal activity can begin to consolidate that social information. But if we're just looking at the persistence of new information, then we have this situation where it's the hippocampus alone. So here the idea is increased hippocampal activity is correlated to just reconsolidating new information, whether it's from social origin or from a computer or whatever. But notice no coactivity of the amygdala. It's as if the social nature of the information is triggering amygdala activity.